Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Connected Wellness Podcast. We are so happy that you're here. I am your host, Rachel Ann. This is our wonderful host, Marianne, and we are so passionate about wellness.
So here in this podcast, we're going to talk about the ways in which our spiritual, emotional, and physical health is all connected and how we can take better care of our whole selves holistically so that we can live our best lives. We're really excited that you're here to take this journey with us. So welcome to episode 6. We made it. I don't know what's like the point we get to really celebrate. I don't know, 10 episodes or something like. But we've just been celebrating every episode, right, Rachel?
Yeah. I'm like, I celebrate after every one of them.
But we're happy that you're here, that you're with us. And we do have a pretty great and important topic today that actually was suggested by one of our wonderful listeners. So you'll know who you are in a minute. Thank you so much for your suggestion. And please, everybody, keep them coming. But before we get into that, we got to talk about
Wellness wins.
Yay, wellness wins of the week. So you want to go first?
Sure, I'll go first. So my wellness win is about the connection between like your mind, your body, your emotions. For my therapist friends, my psychology friends, you'll know this as somatic therapy, which is basically when your body holds on to an emotion and it's expressed in a physical way. And so I would say earlier this week and even into last week a little bit, I noticing that I was feeling a lot of tension in my stomach. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who's also a therapist. When you're a therapist, all of your friends are therapists. I think that's just like kind of how it is. And I was like chatting with her. I was like, hey girl, I'm really stressed about the situation. And like, I feel it in my arms. I feel it in my stomach. And she was like, okay, like, let's do something about it. And she encouraged me to do like specific stretches, exercises, and movements around those body parts. And that was a really great way for the energy that was like being built up for it to be released. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, like I feel less stressed than I did before. And doing these exercises really allowed that energy to leave again, and to leave even more. So it was a really great thing. It's something that I'm doing more often now. And I find that in terms of mindfulness, which is something I know we talk about a lot, with mindfulness is like feeling the sensations in your body and then responding to it. And so I noticed since then, I was like, oh, I noticed my stomach is hurting a little bit more. I noticed my shoulders are a little bit tense. Okay, let me do something about that. So it's been really, really good to have a deeper understanding of, okay, I'm having an emotional response and my body is telling me something about it. And I'm going to do an exercise to alleviate the pain that I'm experiencing. So that's my wellness win.
I think that is so interesting. And I've never heard this term somatic therapy, but I'm super curious about it. I'd love to learn more about it. But yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in the psychosomatic connection, you know, the mind-body, it's huge mind-body medicine. So yeah, this sounds amazing. So I'm happy that you found that and found some help. I feel like, I kind of feel like if I try it though, it's going to be like, okay, everything hurts. What do I do about it?
And that's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay. One step at a time.
Yeah. That's awesome though. Yeah. Good job, Rachel. I love it.
Awesome.
But yeah, there are just so many ways to lean in, to be aware, to address our needs, you know, that sometimes we don't even realize. So I just love having like a little bit of exposure, education to all these different resources. That's really great. So thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you? What's your wellness one?
So I don't know what I would like label this, but I guess I'm finding a lot of satisfaction with my work. So like, especially in the last week or so, I've been having some really great one-on-one moments with students who are coming into the tutoring center. And like, I think I noticed if I just sometimes listen, you know, like obviously we're doing math. I'm a math teacher, right? We're doing math in the math tutoring center, but a lot of times we talk about not math. We talk about things, you know, while we're doing math, while they're working on problems. And especially this one student, recently, he like brought something up, how he was just like, there's so much uncertainty in the world. And I just kind of like listened for a minute, and I felt like he like really needs to talk about this. I just felt like he needed to talk about it. He needed someone to listen. And I listened to him. I like gave him the space instead of being like, okay, anyway, get back to number 2. You know, I let him like say what he needed to say. And I offered just a very quick perspective. I said, well, I'm a Christian. And so what I believe when there's so much uncertainty is that we have to just trust God, you know, and have hope. And we do our best to live our lives, but we have hope that he's going to take care of it. And that little phrase, that one sentence, he like literally stopped. He turned and he looked at me and he was like, I really needed to hear that. Like, I just really needed to hear that. And he actually was like, can I give you a hug? And I was like, yeah, sure. You know? So this, I say kid, he's like 20, but this kid gives me a hug, you know, and he even like left me a little heart on a Post-it on the door. Like, it just clearly meant so much to him. And that meant so much to me, you know, that it meant so much to him. And now I've seen him again this week, and he just wants to talk and talk and talk. And you never know, like, some people just need someone to talk to.
Yeah.
And I realized that's my absolute favorite thing about teaching. It's not, of course, the math, the algebra, the statistics. It's those connections I get to make with my students. And every time I'm like, oh, I don't feel like going to work. Like I mentioned last episode, you know, sometimes in the car, or just like, oh, I'm tired, or today was really, you know, busy. Like those moments are what drive me, you know, to keep going. And it's just, I'm so grateful, honestly. It's such an amazing opportunity to be a light, to be a positive force for these students. You know, it's really, yeah. I was thinking about that today, actually, because yesterday was the last time I saw this particular kid. And yeah, so I'm just grateful. And it reminds me, anytime I'm like, I don't want to go to work, I'm like, no, this is a huge blessing and a huge opportunity, you know, so I'm going to take it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm probably going to melt as soon as we're done, because that's what active listening, which we've been talking about a lot, and giving support, that is such a beautiful example of what that is. And your job isn't to be a counselor or a listener, but you were able to tune in and be like, actually what this person needs is something a little bit different. So I'm going to adjust for that. And that was so beautiful. I love that so much.
Now let me be clear. He also needs help with math, and I'm happy to do that for him also. That's, you know, I know that's what I'm technically paid to do, but I just love that extra component. That's why every time I think, you know, maybe I should try something other than teaching, I feel like God gives me these moments and I'm like, no, you know, this is where I'm meant to be. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. So yeah. Thank God.
I love
feel
that.
like these were some great wins.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go us.
High five. So, okay. But now we definitely need to get into today's topic, which is going to be interesting. So what do we have to look forward to, Rachel?
Yes. Okay, cool. So just like Marianne mentioned, we had somebody who is one of our listeners of the podcast. Thank you, listener of the podcast, for the suggestion. They suggested the topic of family of origin, specifically how your family of origin impacts you in your emotional wellness, your spiritual health journey, your understanding of God, even your physical health journey. Family of origin, for people who are not familiar with that term, it means or refers to the people who were a part of your upbringing in a very intimate way. So it could be if you're somebody that was raised by your parents, if you had siblings, if you had grandparents in the home or extended family members, basically the context of how you came into the world and how you were raised and the people that were a part of that. That's what we mean by family of origin. I am going to be referring to probably the best book I have ever read in my entire life. I am not sponsored by this. If Pete Scazzaro, I think is his name, if he wants to sponsor me, that's so happy. Like, I would love that. But this is a book that we'll be talking about, I'll be referring to a lot. It's called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And I'll also be referring to another book as well with some other things that may come up too, but mostly from this book. And really, it talks about how having issues or difficulties or sometimes even trauma or toxicity in our family of origin is actually really common. It's actually even in the Bible. many, many times. And he starts off that way to really invite Christians into opening their eyes into how their upbringing was and how that impacted them and how that impacts their relationships and how they view the world and even how they view God, and basically what to do about it. So he normalizes a lot of issues that we see that we don't really like to talk about, like family image, pride, shame, stuff like that. He normalizes a lot of that and is like, that's actually in the Bible many, many times. And a lot of people experience that. And these are the things that we can do to understand that and not allow unhealthy things to take hold in our lives in such a strong way. And I love the spiritual perspective about it, especially because he talks about how the enemy or the devil, whatever term you prefer to use, how the enemy uses the difficulties we've experienced as a way to stifle us as Christians. And that's one of the ways that he wins, but he actually doesn't win, because we know that as Christians that the enemy's already defeated. So I freaked out when we got this suggestion. I was like, this is something I coach about a lot. This is something I'm dealing with in my own life and my healing journey. And I know so many other people are too. This book is thebomb.com. We will link it below. So yeah, I'm so excited to talk about it today. How about you?
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, you definitely touched on it, but like the way that you're raised and, you know, it's the formative time of our life, right? We're children. You know, this is when we're developing, literally our brains are developing, when we're developing our sense of ourself, our sense of the world, you know, just how things work. And the problem is that we don't know anything. We don't know any better. So, you know, we are modeled certain behavior by our caregivers. Like we are taught things explicitly and implicitly, and we don't have the kind of capability to sift through and think what is healthy and what is unhealthy, what is, you know, something I would like to live my life by this versus something that, you know, perhaps I don't necessarily agree with. So I do think that's why as an adult, it's important to kind of look back and try and get some awareness of, you know, maybe why do I believe some of the things that I believe, or why do I have some of the difficulties that I have maybe with relationships or, you know, with self-image or things like that. So yeah, I mean, it's everything about our personalities is developed, you know, during this time when we are wholly dependent on our caregivers, right? You know, so yeah, it is big. It's like super important. So I get why, you know, our listener would bring it up. I get why it's a big part of that book that you're talking about and why you feel so strongly about it. Definitely.
Absolutely. And I think something that I'll just kind of jump in here is that doing this is really difficult. And if we're talking about the cultural perspective of this, right? If you come from a collectivistic culture, or Marian and I are Egyptian, which is a very collectivistic culture, sometimes it's difficult to admit that when your parents, if they're immigrants, if they sacrifice so much for you, that you also can feel upset about something that they've done. And he does a really good job of being like, you can appreciate people and you can still feel sad, right? You don't have to have an experience of trauma in order to feel upset about something that happened in your childhood. And I love the examples he uses in the book. He talks about how sibling rivalry is really common. Parents choosing their favorite is really common. Having relationships outside of their marriage that's inappropriate is really, really common. And that helped me to realize that a lot of the times as Christians, especially Christians from collectivistic cultures or Christians who are the children of immigrants, sometimes we prioritize our family or our culture above God. And what he did a really good job of in the book and the illustrations in the Bible, it are constant reminders of like, yes, like God has given us family, friends, social systems, but none of that is to replace God. None of that is like higher than God. Sin exists in every part of our world and our entity because that's just unfortunately how it is. And it's not to say that, oh, you're a crappy person, but it's to say, okay, like there is like the sin of lying or pride or whatever it is in your family. What do you do about it? Right? How do you be obedient to God while also recognizing the hardships that you experience in the family? And so he does a really good job of just normalizing it. and being like, once you accept it, then you know what to do about it. And you can invite God into that space so you can heal from it and figure out, are there some habits or values or thoughts that you need to unlearn that you did learn from your family? How do you come to terms with that? How do you like share forgiveness and compassion? How do you allow yourself to feel healthy anger while also doing what is genuine for you that's in a healthy way? And that is in obedience with God. So I feel like something that's really common that he talks about here that really really rang true in my mind and in the mind for a lot of the clients that I work with who typically are BIPOC women or children of immigrants and are also usually Christian as well, is this idea that like, you know, you can honor your father and mother and still feel upset, you know, and still ask questions and still wonder. And sometimes we place the family values above God. And that's actually like not really what God wants. So that was one heavy thing that I've been having to sit with, both as a coach and as a person in my own life. And I just love that he normalized that a lot.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
I mean, I think that until we are educated or exposed to this idea, we don't even realize the impact, you know, that our family of origin has had on us. Like, so we may live our whole lives up to a certain point, just kind of doing what we've always done, feeling like we've always felt, you know, and not until we stop and think like, well, why? You know, why do I feel like I can't tell people something is the matter with me, right? Like let me actually stop and think about that. And I think sometimes it takes a therapist or a coach to like help you get to that point. Like, why do I feel like this? Like, why does it feel terrifying, you know, to reveal my vulnerability to somebody? And then you can maybe trace it back again to family of origin. But also I think here with our, you know, trifecta of wellness that we're talking about, sometimes it's not maybe even something so serious. Like if you think about what our families prioritized when we were growing up, right? Like did they prioritize, you know, physical health and wellness? Or did they prioritize, like for a lot of us, academic excellence? Like that's the most important thing, right? When you're a kid, nothing else matters unless you get straight A's, right? So, you know, just things like that. Again, we carry those with us, and we have to stop and see, is this serving me, right? Another one, like you said about collectivistic cultures. We're so food-based, right? Food is huge, and turning down food is offensive, right? So, you know, you may end up growing up feeling like I have to eat everything in front of me, you know, all of the time, or I'm going to hurt somebody's feelings. And then you end up, you know, unhealthy, you know? So just, even like there's very big things, you know, that are foundational to our sense of self and identity. And then there's also like relatively small things, but they all impact us. And we just need to really stop and kind of think, is this really what I believe? Like me now, you know, as an adult, is this what I believe? Or is this just what I was, you know, taught to believe? Or is this how I really want to live my life? Or is this just what I've seen, you know, what I've been exposed to? So I feel like that's the first step in this process. And unfortunately, that might be hard to do on your own, right?
Yeah. That's probably one of the biggest things that I coach on is giving people the space and the freedom to be like, I'm mad about this thing that happened in my family of origin. And I was never able to say something or do something about it because it would be considered a threat or I would receive consequences for it. But now in my mid-30s, I'm like realizing how it's impacting me. And the first step is just acknowledging it. And then once you do acknowledge, it's like, okay, what do I want to do about it? Right. And we're not forcing other people to also do something about it, right? You cannot control people. God has made that very clear. We are not God. It is not our job to control people. But what is our responsibility and something we can control is what do we want to do with those values? And I love that you talked about the academics piece because I was like, yeah, I only did sports in high school because it would look good on my college application.
100%.
That's the only reason why I did it.
Piano for 100 years, why I was in the band, even like through senior year when I was like, I don't like this anymore. I don't want to do it. Nope. You're the band. You're the section leader. You got to put it on your applications. Yeah. You got to be president of the honor society. Like, and again, just side note, I know it's funny, but like my parents never actually said those things that like, you have to do this, but it was kind of understood, it was just, again, this is the way things are. And again, I think I mentioned this before, but that immigration is huge. That mentality, between we have to survive because of everything that we've, given up to come to this new country. It makes you live a certain way, makes you prioritize, job security over potentially job satisfaction, right? Things like that. So, I think looking back from a place of compassion and understanding, for me, anyway, I feel like that's important because I know you've mentioned anger a few times, but I don't want to get angry. And I think sometimes there is a place for anger, but there's enough things in the world that make me angry. I'll be honest with you. And I don't want to get angry. I don't want to place blame. I just want to say that, okay, now I know X, Y, Z, but this is how I want to live the rest of my life. Right. And maybe saying, okay, this is why I've always done this. This is why I've always cleaned my plate and thought that, my achievement is more important than my well-being, for example, right? Yeah. But now moving forward, I want to prioritize my well-being. I want to prioritize my health and not, placing blame. And sorry, I just want to say one more thing about that, because I worry that when you place blame on people or others for something that you're feeling, you can feel that you're victimized. And when we feel like we're victimized, I think sometimes it makes us feel helpless, right? That, this happened to me. Okay. I'm the victim here. I can't do anything to make my life better, So I don't know. I think it might be a very small change in mindset, but just saying, okay, this happened. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just going to move forward empowers me to make the changes I want to make without feeling like terrible things happen to me and I'm, a victim. So I don't know. You can tell me if you think otherwise, especially from a therapy standpoint, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think you're referring to something which is difficult for a lot of us to do as humans, which is to accept the and of situations. What I mean by that is understanding the gray area of life, understanding that you can blame somebody who has hurt you. They hurt you, therefore, you can blame them. You punched me, I blame you for punching me, right? Very minor example. And also you can feel angry about it, which anger can be healthy or unhealthy. And the Bible actually talks about righteous anger. When we have been harmed or hurt, then yes, we will feel angry because that is an appropriate response to us being harmed. But we want to make sure it stays healthy and it stays righteous. We want to make sure it doesn't lead to doing unhealthy things like being physically aggressive or harmful towards other people. So we can blame people when appropriate. We can be angry, and we also can forgive. We can also understand the circumstances of how that came to be. That's a lot of ands. That is very heavy, and that is why lots of people do what you just mentioned. And I'm not saying, Marianne, do better. What I'm saying is it's a lot to process, which is why working with a therapist or a coach is really, really helpful, because you break it down. You say, okay, I can blame, what's an example I can give? You can blame your parents for not giving you access to a therapist, and you can feel angry that they did not support your desire to go to therapy. And you can understand why they wouldn't, because in their generation, access to mental health was not a thing they were talking about. And in our culture, it's very stigmatized. And maybe you're from a community where access to resources for something like therapy was just not an option. And we know better now, so we can do something different without forcing other people to change. But since we are living our lives, yes, the Lord is, in charge of everything. He's the author of everything, but we co-work with the Lord with the things he tells us to do, and then we do it. So we say, okay, I'm feeling this unction from the Lord to seek a therapist or to unlearn this thing. So now I'm going to go off and do it. All of that is exhausting. And that's just that. We didn't even talk about the fact that you work. Maybe you're married. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you're moving. Maybe you want to work out. Like all of that is really, really heavy. But when we keep that heaviness, the longer we keep it and we don't do something about it, the more we will randomly explode or randomly have an unwarranted response in the future, because we're not actually responding to the situation. We're actually responding to the hurt from 20, 30, 50 years ago. So everything you said is valid. And I do think, I love that you mentioned the term victim, because I'm hearing a lot of reclaiming of that word. Some people say, no, we don't say victim, we say thriver, because yes, something happened to you, but I'm still thriving even because of that. Or saying, yeah, I was a victim because there was nothing I could have done, but there's something I can do now.
Yeah.
And I love that you're bringing up the idea of agency, of hope, of ownership. We cannot control what people do to us, but what we can do is we can control the boundaries that we put in place to prevent further harm from happening. We can work on our communication skills to communicate in a healthy way how we wish to be treated, and we can heal.
Yeah.
We can do the healing. But that's all very intense, and that's all a lot and probably expensive if you're going to be in therapy for many, many years, which I say, and then I promise I'll be quiet. I've been in therapy for 10 plus years. I'm very open about it. I will never calculate the amount of dollars I have spent. But what I will say is my husband, my friends, my clients, the people in my life, they are seeing the difference of me being in therapy, and they are probably very thankful that I have been in therapy.
Well,
I don't want to know
I think
what it would be like
really
without that.
Funny that you say that. However, doesn't matter what the money amount is, Rachel Ann. I think that our health is priceless, right? You can't put a price on it. So, for example, if God forbid you need a medication or a surgery, if you have the money, you're going to pay whatever money it takes, to get healthy. And I think it's the same thing. And, praise God, if you have the resources, then don't worry about what the cost is. So, yeah, I mean, I like that you mentioned that, because sometimes it is a legitimate hindrance, right, to seeking care. Like you just do not have the resources. But if you have the resources, I wouldn't think twice about spending them. Like it's probably worth every penny and more, and worth not having coffee, from your favorite coffee shop or whatever it is you need to do to make sure that you can afford it. But that's a side note, because you mentioned that. But what I was thinking of when you were talking was, I can't remember, but I just heard somebody speaking about this like within the last week, but I can't remember who or what the context was. But this idea that, because we were talking about victim, this idea that whatever happens to us is often not our fault. Right. So kind of the same what we're saying here, like the way that we were treated or raised or whatever. It's not my fault, but it's my responsibility. And what does that mean? Exactly what you said, that moving forward, it's up to me how I'm going to respond to this. Right. So again, what happened is not my fault. It happened. This refers to any trauma, any difficulty, any, mistreatment in our lives, familial or not. It's not my fault, but how I respond is my responsibility. So moving forward, so that's kind of what I was getting at with this idea that sometimes feel like this happened to me, and so the result is what it is, right? I'm screwed up for life, and there's nothing I can do about it. I hate for someone to feel that helpless, because I know horrible things happen to people, horrible things I couldn't even imagine, but heartbreaking. But even then, you have the choice to move forward from it, right? Not without difficulty, with probably much difficulty and help and support. But I just think that's important, to feel that sense of empowerment. And no matter what, I can rise from this. I can get better regardless. Yeah.
And I think a big part of that, which I think ties in which ties into the family origin piece, is believing that that is possible. And something that they talk about in emotionally healthy spirituality is that we often repeat the behaviors, the values, the feelings, the nuances that we received from our family of origin. We just repeat that naturally because that's like what we were around. And so it's really difficult to break out of that norm. And especially there are certain contexts where there are consequences or perceived consequences if you do something that is different than what is expected. So if you go to therapy and the community finds out, that's going to be embarrassing to your parents. So therefore you shouldn't go to therapy, right? That's a very common example that I hear in our communities, but also other communities of color and in other children of immigrants. It's like, oh my gosh, I want to do something that is healthy for me, but because it may look bad on somebody else and it may negatively impact this thing, then I'm not going to do it. And so what happens is we create this cycle of dysfunction to continue. And something the author talks about is that is one of the ways that the enemy attacks. The enemy likes to attack families. They like to attack ministries. They like to attack pastoral families. So pray for me and my pastor husband if you think of it. we accept all prayers. But there's certain things that if the enemy attacks it, the generations or the people underneath are going to be impacted negatively forever. And that's why things like generational curses, generational trauma, these are new things that are being spoken about a lot more. But that's what it looks like from the spiritual realm. If the enemy is able to embed lies or pride in our family of origin, then I'm going to continue to move forward in that sin. And I'm going to teach that to my children or in my friendship groups. I'm going to be spreading that. And I'm not trying to be like deep and scary and spooky here, but I think something we do have to realize as Christians is that once we have a thriving relationship with Jesus, once we, declare that Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior, the devil gets really mad about that. That is like not something the devil's trying to do. His whole purpose is to lie to us and to make us feel far from God and not believe that Jesus saved us anymore. That's like the whole purpose. And so that was something that was really big for me as I've been on like my own inner child healing journey and just working with clients, is remembering that there is a big spiritual component to this. So for people who are Christians, please go to therapy and do the work. Just like Abuna shared with us last time, please do all of the things. But that's where that prayer piece comes into. We need to be praying, hey God, like help me break the generational curses. Help me to forgive my parents, my family, my friends, my colleagues, my whoever. Help me to create the change that I need to see that you want to bring into the world through me, through my family. And that is heavy. And that is why that's another reason why we don't want to do it. But our mental health, our emotional health, our physical health, our spiritual health, all of those things are at risk when we forget that spiritual factor of things. And the fact that all of this is in the Bible, when I was going through my own journey and I was just reading what was happening in the Bible, I was like, oh, this is nothing new. This is nothing new. The enemy does the same thing over and over again, maybe just using a different flavor this time around, but it's the same thing over and over again. And I found that to be really comforting to know that, I'm not alone in realizing these things about my own life, my own childhood.
When you say that it's not new in the Bible, the first story that comes to my mind is Jacob and Esau. That was some major family drama.
That was wild.
Messed up stuff right there. Yeah.
Yeah, and then Joseph, his brothers literally sold him into slavery. That is like, I think that's the thing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. 2 seconds. Like, the Old Testament be wild. Like the things that people do, Cain and Abel. Hello, let's just murder your sibling. Yeah. Oh, like parents having like favorites. It's like, no. Oh, parents like normalizing sleeping with people outside of your marriage. Like, no. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so I read these things and I was like, I'm going to be okay. Yeah. This is not the first time, like me praying about this thing is not the first time God has had to deal with generational curse breaking,
Yeah. It is wild. And you say Cain and Abel, I mean, that's literally the first pair of siblings. So it sounds like kind of siblings, did not have it good from literally day one. So yeah. I mean, that's a really good point. And it is comforting, that like you said, and like you said, emotionally healthy spirituality mentions it. This is a very normal experience, right? Having difficulties with your family of origin. So that is comforting, all the way back to the first pair of siblings. So
all the way from the beginning, the first
way.
Adam and Eve,
okay,
they were trifling too,
Well, this is a lot, Rachel. So can you tell us if there's like kind of one thing like to take away of what we can do, if we're starting thinking about, these things, or even if we're well into our journey, what's one thing that we can do or think about as we work through these issues?
Yeah, I think a really big thing to keep in mind is that everything that you're experiencing and that you're witnessing and you're healing from and you're grieving and you're wondering about in terms of your family origin and stuff like that, reminding yourself that you can exist in that gray area and you can free yourself from the pressure of trying to get other people to understand or trying to get answers. I think that's a big thing. And he talks about this in the Emotionally Healthy Spirituality book. Whether you experience trauma or not, we all have difficulties. Life is just very, very hard. And it's difficult to accept the ands of the situation because we live in a world that's very or. But in reality, and a big way that God works in our lives is a very and type of way. And so stepping into that and allowing yourself the freedom to feel. One of the biggest things that I've ever read in my entire life when I was in my graduate school program was talking about how people need to have the freedom to hate. And as Christians, we're not supposed to hate, right? Yeah. And I think what they were referring to is people need to have the freedom to understand that an emotion can exist in the potential of it. But as Christians, what we do, we don't end it there. We say, Lord, I'm having feelings of hatred towards this person. I need to give it to you. I need to repent from this. And I need to unpack where this is coming from. But having the freedom to feel an emotion, that in itself already unlocks a lot of things. There's a lot of people in their family of origin. They learn that logic is the only way to go. And they learn that emotions is something that we don't listen to. There's some church cultures that even say that emotions are demonic. Like they go that route, which we can talk about that another time because that's 5 episodes right there. And so I feel like I just made it more complicated. So the one thing is to hopefully, you're reading this book. Hopefully you're working with a practitioner or somebody who can help you with this stuff. But the one thing for you to remind yourself is that this is a very normal thing and you can have the courage to do the thing that is different. And even if it's something like feeling that emotion that's difficult to feel, that in itself is really, really freeing. Even if you want to examine why you have this unhealthy habit that you learned from childhood, you can do that. There's a lot of freedom that we experience when we start to look back and wonder. But it's scary, but there's a lot of freedom there. And that's what propels you forward.
Yeah, I think just what you said too about giving yourself permission to have emotions, even negative emotions, and is really important because we stifle them so much. They're just uncomfortable. You don't want to have these negative emotions, but that is, of course, the first step. How can you heal from something or move on from something if you don't acknowledge it? But I do also love that you said, I feel this negative emotion. Where do I turn with it? To God, right? Don't, just sit with it in myself because then it can fester. And of course, take it to a professional, but also we need to take it to our Father. He wants to free us, right, from those things that are kind of holding us back. So yeah, I think that's huge.
Yeah. And he knows it already.
Yeah.
He already knows.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think my big takeaway is just that I can choose for myself, what I believe to be healthy. I can, make my own choices. I can change my habits and it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks about it. Right. I feel like we talked about this before. Oh yeah, you mentioned like I can't regulate other people's opinions or reactions or whatever. That's not up to me, and it doesn't matter. I can decide what's best for me. So yeah, that takes a lot of courage. But I think that's a key. It's my life. Like, no one else is going to live this life but me. Right. So why should I let anyone else dictate kind of what I do or how I feel? Right.
Yeah. A lot of the times we do learn that we're supposed to have an external entity dictate our lives. And that's one of the biggest things actually that I have to walk people through to unlearn is like, yeah, you learned that and we just don't do that anymore. And what would that look like for you to dictate? And as Christians, what would it look like for you to pray to God about these things? And that's another reason why this is so scary, because it's brand new territory. It's like, who am I outside of these things that I learned from my family of origin? I promise I'll be quiet after this one. I love that our generation is stepping into this a lot. And something that I was having a conversation with somebody about this, and they were like, everybody's saying trauma, trauma, trauma. And I was like, statistically speaking, our generation is going to experience trauma because the generation above us did not have access to mental health, physical health, or spiritual health resources. So when you don't have access to support, you're still going to do the best that you can, but the likelihood of doing something that can be damaging to a person is high. And that's just statistically speaking. And so thankfully in our generation, we're becoming much more mental health friendly and understanding how God uses that as a way to bring glory to him and to for people to give glory to him as well outside of ourselves. And so be encouraged on your journey. And I feel like this is a good segue to go into our conclusion part, which is tell us what you think about this. I'll drop my Instagram. We'll drop Marianne's Instagram. We'll drop our email. We know that this can be a really tough conversation. I feel like there's so much more we can dive into, but talk to us about what you're thinking and what you're feeling from this conversation. And I'll also drop I created a whole thing about it on Instagram to encourage people to dig into I'll drop that below too. And also the link. But you can find us on Instagram, Connected Wellness Podcast. We'll drop both of ours. You can email us, connectedwellnesspodcast@gmail.com. And we would love to hear about different topics that you want to hear about. Because y'all have, like you can see, this was somebody who's listening was like, please talk about this. And I'm so happy that they suggested that. And I can only imagine other suggestions that y'all have that are really, really dope to talk about and really transformative for other people to hear. To know that you are not alone in wondering about your family of origin. You are not alone in wondering about active listening and all of these things. So, yeah. Anything else to add in, Marianne?
Just, stay tuned. Hopefully we hope to have more guests coming onto the show. We've gotten some great feedback from having Father Daniel join us last time, and we have some great ideas for some new guests to join us as well. So we hope to see you. We hope to hear from you. And thank you so much for listening. And really just, I think we should pray for one another, because there is so much heaviness and difficulty and struggle as we try to get better. And but we're here for you. We're all kind of walking the same path. And, so may you be well, right? And may you be happy. And you deserve it, right? Like you deserve it. You're worth it. You're worth the effort. Whatever money, like you were saying, Rachel, you're definitely worth it. So just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I love that. And on that note, be well.
Be well. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Be well. We'll see you later. Take care, everybody. Bye.